Elections will now come to order. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Clegg. Present. Representative Cortez.
Here.
Representative Busey. Here. Representative Fierro. Representative Israel. Here. Representative Middleton. Present. Representative Swanson.
Quorum is present. Good morning, and thank you all for being here today. Before we begin, I wanted to once again, and I know the announcement's been made, but there is an overflow room set up across the hall right here at E2.014. For those of you that aren't able to have a seat, there is an overflow room set up for you all. So just make sure you wanted to know about that. The House convenes at 10 a.m. this morning in an effort to allow everyone to testify. We're going to limit testimony to 2 minutes per person. Please state your name, who you represent, and your position on the bill. Refrain from repeating testimony from other witnesses if possible. I'll call up several witnesses at a time so that way everybody knows what order they're coming up in. It is the intent of the chair to close the registration for witnesses at 8:30 this morning. It's been open since 7 a.m. and the hearing was scheduled to begin at 8. The chair may limit the number of testifying witnesses as necessary to ensure consideration of posted and pending business. Members, are there any questions? We'll begin. The chair lays out Senate Bill 9. The chair offers a complete committee substitute and recognizes Chairwoman Click to explain the measure.
Thank you, members. SB 9 is based on the work of the Interim Senate Select Committee on Election Security, chaired by Senator Hughes. The intent of this committee substitute is neither voter suppression nor to enable voter fraud. Ultimately, the intent of SB 9 is to strengthen election integrity and make sure all votes cast are legitimate votes and no legal voter is inhibited from casting their ballot. Article 1 of SB 9 deals with criminal penalties for election offenses. It creates a Class B misdemeanor for impeding access to a polling location within 100 feet of the entrance and taking a ballot from a voter without the voter's permission. It is a Class A misdemeanor if you're serving as a poll watcher and do this. It escalates an offense from Class B misdemeanor to a state jail felony for knowingly making a false statement on a voter registration application. I repeat, knowingly. It also includes knowingly providing voter assistance illegally. It also escalates the offense of retaliation against a voter by a poll watcher from a third-degree felony to a second-degree felony. Section 1.06 clarifies that a person votes illegally if they are aware of the fact that they are ineligible to vote and vote anyway. But it clarifies that this section does not apply to provisional voting. This protects the provisional voting safety net while cracking down on illegal voting. Section 1.08 requires the presiding election judge to confirm that each voting machine has its public votes counter reset to 0 and to print the tally tape showing a count of 0 before the polls can be opened on Election Day. Before closing the polls, the presiding election judge is required to verify and document the public count on each voting machine and print 3 copies of the tally tape. It is a Class B misdemeanor if the judge does not do this. Additionally, this section allows the County Commissioners Court of a county that participates in a county-wide polling place program to request a waiver of this requirement from the Secretary of State due to having county-wide polling. To clarify, while my committee substitute moved this language into a better section of code, this language was added in a floor amendment floor amendment number 9 by Senator Hall on the Senate floor. This language is in sections 1.04 and 1.09 of the engrossed version of SB 9 that came over to the House. I did not add this language to the committee substitute. It was added on the Senate floor by Senator Hall. Section 1.09 provides a defense to prosecution for employees of law enforcement agencies investigating election fraud. The committee substitute clarifies that this defense to prosecution does not apply if the employee finally cast a fraudulent ballot. Article 2 of SB 9 deals with voters, voter assistants, and poll watchers. Section 2.01 prohibits a voter registration application from being accepted if any of the boxes were pre-checked or not checked by the voter. Section 2.02, 2.04, 2.05, 2.06, and 2.08 add signature verification committees to the location where poll watchers can be appointed. Section 2.07 allows a poll watcher to inspect the voter assistant forms at the early voting ballot board or signature verification committee, not the polling location. Section 2.10 requires a person who transports 3 or more curbside voters to the same polling place at the same time to fill out a voter assistant form with their name, address, and if they are only providing transportation assistance or also assistance in voting. To clarify, this section only applies to a person who is driving 3 or more unrelated voters who are voting curbside at the same location, at the same time, in the same vehicle. This does not apply to a person who's driving a person to the polls and the voter votes inside. This only applies to curbside voting. That was one of the changes that we made to the bill, is it was actually poorly drafted and put in the wrong section of code. Because the driver is in the polling place, the car, he or she should be registered. If they choose to exit the vehicle while the voting is occurring, we are working on a floor amendment that would exempt those individuals from filling out a form. Section 2.11 adds relationship to the voter to the information a voter assistant has to provide. Currently, a voter assistant has to fill out an oath of assistance attesting that they will only assist the voter, not influence their vote, and fill out a combo form with the assistant's name and address. Hopefully, a combined form will expedite this process. Section 2.12 adds a notification on the application for a ballot by mail notifying voters that expectant mothers with a likely delivery near Election Day are eligible to vote by mail. Section 2.13 adds the new assistant form to be incorporated into the ballot by mail instructions. Section 2.14 allows a watcher to have a device that can record only in central count but not connect it to the internet. Article 3 of SB 9 deals with election contests involving alleged fraud. It sets the venue for statewide election contests to be either Travis County or the contestee's residing county, sets an evidentiary standard, sets civil penalties, and handles attorney fees. Article 4 of SB 9 gives the Attorney General access to teams and allows the Secretary of State to share data with other states to fulfill their requirement to participate in an interstate voter crosscheck. Section 4.04 addresses county-wide polling. It prohibits counties from dropping below 80% of the precinct election day polling sites during high turnout presidential and gubernatorial elections in November of even-numbered years. It uses state representative districts instead of county commissioners' districts to allocate polling locations in counties over 1 million. It requires the 4 closest polling locations to be posted outside each county-wide polling center. Section 4.06 is language Senator Hall added on the Senate floor with an amendment requiring the counting station manager and the counting station election judge to develop a protocol to prohibit electronic devices from being connected to the internet in the central counting station. Finally, Article 5 maintains the risk-limiting audit requirement and allows the Secretary of State's office to start small with a pilot program to make sure it is implemented well. Section 5.02 was removed from the committee substitute. It would have prohibited DREs required for all voting machines by 2020. Open for any questions and reserve the right to close.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, are there any questions? I would also like to recognize Representative Briscoe Kane for joining us today, and welcome Chairman Rafael Angia for being here on the dais with us. Once again, members, any questions for Chairwoman Click? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and begin the public testimony. Once again, we are limiting each speaker to 2 minutes. We ask that you please state your name, who you represent, and your position on the bill for the record. The first 3 speakers will be Chris Davis, Jeff Miller, and Glenn Maxey. Please come up. Chair calls Chris Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, members. Chris Davis on behalf of the Texas Association of Election Administrators testifying in opposition to Senate Bill 9. We appreciate the Chairwoman actually listening to the concerns of county election officials regarding this bill with the removal of our members' largest concern, the decertification of paperless DREs, machines that so many of our member counties recently purchased in the good faith that they'd see a responsible, decades-long return on investment. So we thank you for listening on that count. But there is still so much of this bill that is plain bad policy. Whether it's the criminalization of poll workers, already a scarce resource, as I'm sure the Madam Chairwoman would agree, for innocently forgetting to print a zero tape at a polling place or forgetting to provide a poll watcher a tally tape at the end of a long day. Or whether it's the bad policy of now allowing poll watchers to record ballot counting in areas where ballot voting still occurs, with all the privacy that that's supposed to entail. Or whether it's the bad policy of mandating that a driver of more than 3 non-related voters must now attest to the reason of their assistance for curbside voting due to physical disability. Or whether it's the bad policy of placing undue limitations on vote centers under the notion that countywide polling place programs limit a voter's choices where to vote, when in fact it's demonstrably the opposite. A voter's choices increase by tens or hundreds fold. As the very people that will be tasked to carry out this bill's measures and quite frankly administer your next elections, these are our problems with it. We hope you're still listening. Happy to answer any questions.
Members, any questions? Representative Israel.
Thank you. This is a troublesome bill, and I appreciate your views on it. And I've deferred to your profession since my time on this elections committee. You guys know better than I how to do these things, and I know we don't always agree on everything. But the section that popped out to me, and I wanted some more mechanical understanding, was because we don't do this as legislators, is the tape part about taking it to 0. This is it, as you said, election judges are hard to find. And I was wondering if you would elaborate more on the mechanics of like maybe some of the training that you do, and do these mistakes occur, and if they occur, I guess what I'm saying is that I was hoping that this thing should be more of a procedural change, not a criminal penalty. And so I just wanted you to elaborate more for those of us who don't know what that means when you take it to zero. Could you elaborate a little more on the mechanics and elaborate if you want on your challenges in finding elections folks to work the polls?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Representative. Well, that's something that we're required to do, right, is to reset these machines. These machines need to be set to zero, really, at our warehouse when we're preparing these machines. And we actually, if the county's doing their job well and correctly, prepare zero tapes then and there, and then require, through training of poll workers that have to cover the whole gamut of the election code. I sympathize with anybody on this committee that has to wade through the election code like we must every election, for every training of all the poll workers for every election. But they must also print out a zero tape, and we have no problem as member counties of county election officers of having those zero tapes available for reproduction at our offices or after an election if the public needs that. But it's something that we need to do. But you touched on what I think is kind of a paradigm shift in this bill, and it's the criminalizing of the omission, and what I would be concerned about, the innocent omission of one of the myriad tasks that a poll worker must do before, during, and after the polls close. It's a cliche term, but that's a slippery slope, and we're concerned that if that's going to be criminalized, sure, Class B misdemeanor, but criminalized, what else of all the tasks that poll workers must now do, if we forget to do them, or if they forget to do them, we train them, but they'll forget. They're human. Will those be criminalized as well?
A lot of us get notices prior to a primary election to say, hey, if you have friends or family who can work a poll, they're looking for poll workers. It seems to me like this is only this. If word got out and this were to become law, people would say, well, I'm just doing this to make a little extra money and do my civic duty as well.
Yes, ma'am. A chilling effect would think we'd see on poll workers.
Yeah, and how much do these folks make?
$10, $12 dollars an hour. And again, not doing it for the money, doing it out of a sense of civic duty. But if there's risk, and we train our poll workers to be risk averse, to remove liability in conducting their election. But this is one that'd be tough to, in an already charged environment, just accusations being lobbed at them, possibly unfounded accusations of, well, you forgot this and you forgot this on purpose. We're going to go to the district attorney's office to file a charge on you.
One more question while I got you here. In terms of procedure, is the taking the machine to zero, is that part of the procedure now?
Yes, it is indeed.
All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Representative Busey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris, thank you for being here.
Yes, sir.
On behalf of all of our election administrators, I want to ask some of the things you pointed out as bad policy. One that jumps out at me is the assisting by driving individuals, 3 or more that are not related, to do curbside voting. I've got a 91-year-old grandmother. She's in a retirement home, and so I just want to get to a scenario here. If she and 3 of her friends, so there's 4 of them, or 3 or more, get an Uber ride to go vote, would that Uber driver have to fill out this form because he brought them to a curbside vote? They're all in wheelchairs. They'd all be potentially curbside voting. Is that your understanding?
That's my understanding and reading of this bill. We recognize it's been amended some from the Senate and possibly even softened. But yes, the answer is an Uber driver would have to at least attest as to the reason why they're assisting these voters. If these voters, your grandmother and her friends, are requesting curbside voting.
Okay, so they would request it. Person comes out. They bring the form with them. How would you, as an election administrator, be overseeing this new kind of form? And I mean, are y'all the ones to police this?
Well, we'd be the ones to implement it,
Yeah.
and if that's what you mean by policing and sending at least 1 or possibly 2 poll workers out away from what is most likely a busy polling place to the curbside to do form filling out. and individual and unique form filling or form completion by every driver, not just a standard oath with blanks in it. I mean, because this driver, as I read the bill, has to put in their name, their address, and what parts of the code or what's the reason they are assisting these folks or driving them to the polling place for curbside. Is it for the physical disability or inability for these folks to go inside? And just there's a bit of, we feel, violation of a voter's privacy in that.
Okay. Just another thing, you talked about criminalization of poll workers. We just talked about zeroing out the tape. This bill deals a lot with kind of increasing severity of penalties. Who's going to be at these sites to ensure this law is enforced if this bill becomes law? Is that your burden, your responsibility?
It's our burden. It's our presiding judge's burden. You know, the burden, we give this individual powers in some certain circumstances of a district judge to follow the law. So yes, if this is passed into law, we'll be training our poll workers and our presiding judge to implement this and add it to all the rest of the laundry list of things that they've got to be very aware from. But the difference is with this one, the fear of criminal penalty.
Okay. One more thing, you talked about poll watchers recording ballot counting. Can you talk about the issue there, the privacy issue there, and what your concerns are, why you brought that up as one of your laundry items here?
At the onset of SB 9, this was included in it, and just we're now created a class of folks that can, despite all the warnings and signs that we have at our polling place, bring in a cell phone and record video of something happening at the polling place. It's unprecedented. And to expect that individual, that poll watcher, to just record ballot counting, because ballot counting arguably can occur at a polling place. And at the ballot voting, if a voting booth is near that tabulation machine, we're concerned that that voter's privacy can be violated. Also, being able to record events at a recount. Poll watchers can now, at this very moment, under current law, record with note, paper, and pencil the concerns they have in the recounting process, a ballot or an issue, and they can bring it up. There's a method and a process for them to bring it up to the presiding judge. Why allow them to record that and be the only ones that can do that? Not the candidate, not the workers, not myself as an election administrator or county election officer, but a poll watcher can now record actions at a ballot counting place.
All right, I appreciate your feedback.
Thank
Sir.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chairwoman Click.
Mr. Davis, you mentioned that this legislation required or talked about increased penalties.
Yes, ma'am.
So some of these items are already criminal penalties. They're already against the law. Is that correct?
Well, we didn't address, that is correct, as far as the items that were for a voter and the increased penalty on voter fraud. But, Madam Chair, I believe there's no precedent for criminalizing poll workers for not doing a task that we've trained them and that the code provides them to do. There's been no, to my knowledge, and I'll defer to the SOS, criminalization or hammer on poll workers or election officers if they don't do some of these things. That's new to us.
Already some criminal penalties in the code regarding those. The recording device is only for central count.
We're concerned about
And
the broadness of the
it's not
language,
something
ma'am.
that can be streamed because it cannot be connected to the internet.
Agreed with that. But ballot counting, we're concerned about the broad application of that, and we're particularly concerned of poll watchers reading the code as they do and saying, ballot counting, you've got ballot counting at every one of your vote centers, Mr. Davis. Why can't I record this?
Because it specifically says in this legislation that it's central count only.
We see it in two sections of the code. I'll reread that, ma'am, but we see it in two sections of the code. Central count for recounts and at ballot locations where ballot counting occurs. And quite frankly, ballot counting occurs at our vote centers. That's where the ballots are tabulated.
Thank you. Representative Kane.
Mr. Davis, as I understand from your testimony, we do a zero tape at kind of central, and then you're offering to make a duplicate of that zero tape for the election judge. Why not make a second one on site on election day?
We could definitely provide copies of zero tapes because they happen at the beginning of the day or the beginning of early voting or the beginning of the early voting day. But there's also a section in this code, Representative Kane, where we've got to provide copies of tally tapes, tapes with actual results on them, and provide copies of those to the poll workers. That's going to delay your results at night. I hope you're patient on your next election and you're wondering why Harris County Election Office or County Clerk's Office is taking too long to get the returns on. Well, one of the reasons is because we've had to provide copies of the tapes to the poll watchers that requested it because it's now in the law. But our main point is the criminalization of it if we don't. It's that simple.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm more concerned about the integrity of our elections than I am getting my results back. Aren't you?
We are, but we're more concerned of losing poll workers that won't work because they may risk a criminal record.
Yeah. We were also discussing people driving people to the polls and some of these theories of what may happen. Has the Attorney General written an advisory opinion of the meaning of this?
I'm not advised.
Are you an attorney?
I'm not.
Okay. There's a lot of theories here, and I don't think anyone really knows. By the way, have you read the committee substitute to this bill?
We have. I have it before me.
Okay. I'm just curious because you had told me you were opposed to it. That's some pretty quick opposition.
There's a lot of stuff. It's quite the Christmas tree, Representative.
Hold on. Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Representative Fierro.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Davis, my question goes back to Representative Busey's question. If we are eliminating mobile voting polls sites, there's a bill out there that could potentially do that. Isn't it going to be more important for us to have carpooling? It's going to make it more a necessity. And so as these people carpool, one of them's going to have to fill out this form. Am I correct?
I'm not sure how much I can speak to other bills that aren't before us today, Representative, but we have to require and offer curbside voting at every one of our sites. And if sites are reduced, yeah, there'd be more pressure for folks to go to fewer sites, be they precinct-based locations or vote center locations, and the length of time required to do that, or the increase in incidents of what we read as violations of voter privacy is problematic. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions, members? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Chair calls Jeff Miller.
Jeff Miller, Disability Rights Texas, testifying against the bill. Thank you, committee, for the opportunity to address you today and talk about SB 9. I'm Jeff Miller. I'm a policy specialist with Disability Rights Texas. Disability Rights Texas is the state's designated protection and advocacy organization for Texans with disabilities. And there's lots of specific issues with the bill that we have concerns with, and I'm not going to go over all of them. You can see in my testimony it goes through the sections we have concerns with. I will say, to start with, that Disability Rights Texas and the disability community in general really understand what this bill is about and agree that integrity in our elections is very, very important. But so is the ability of Texans with disabilities to exercise their right to vote. Under the National Voting Rights Act, people with disabilities have the right to have someone assist them if they need assistance at the polls. The only requirement in federal law is that that person that assists them not be their employer or an agent of their union. We are really concerned because although is probably not intentional, there are several provisions of the committee substitute of this bill that actually will end up causing more barriers for individuals with disabilities that want to vote and need assistance, and will also have a chilling effect on people being willing to assist Texans with disabilities that want to vote. Particularly of note and concern to us is in section 107, where the bill now would make it a state jail felony if someone unlawfully assists, is the language in the elections code, a voter. And as part of unlawfully assisting someone, the code talks about suggesting by word, sign, or gesture how to vote. And What our concern is because there is no provision in the code that would give safe harbor to someone that's assisting a voter with a disability, and there's no requirement for training of poll watchers or poll workers of what it looks like to assist a voter with a disability. I think you'll hear later on today through testimony that sometimes when assisting a voter that has an intellectual or developmental disability to vote, using things like cueing and questioning and pointing or gesturing, those are parts of support. And we are really concerned that now people that volunteer their time to
Sir,
assist
if you can wrap up your
voters.
testimony, please.
We are afraid that criminalizing that with the threat of a jail felony would really hamper the ability of Texans to get assistance at the polls.
Yes, sir. Members, any questions? Thank you. Glenn Maxey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Glenn Maxey, Texas Democratic Party, here representing the Democratic Party and myself in opposition to Senate Bill 9. I'm going to try to talk quickly about three parts of the bill: the assistant part, voting center part, and the election contest part. In the assistant part of this bill, I'm concerned about the fact that we are adding something to the back of a ballot envelope. In the packet I've passed out on about page 3 is an actual size picture of a back of a ballot envelope, which is already too hard for anybody to read. I cannot read this. I must, with my eyesight, cannot read it. We're adding more information to it. There's no real estate to do so. So I am suggesting that we have an amendment suggestion here to take the assistant stuff off the envelope, put it on an extra form, and print on the envelope in bold. If you have assistants, fill out the assistance form. It will make the ballot envelope clearer for the other things that are on it, such as witnessing and the other prohibitions, and put all the assistant stuff on another form. Secondly, in the voting center section, 403, Mr. Bohock's bill was added to this, which does the mathematics of making sure that voter registration, voting centers match the percentage of voter registration. In that section, it says that you base that on the election day voter registration. Before a presidential election in 2020, tens of thousands, maybe as many as 50,000 in Travis County in past years, have registered to vote at 30 days out. They're not processed until 10 days before the election, and this is putting this circular argument that these election clerks have to set polling places based on something that we won't know until 10 days before the election when you do polling places months prior. So I'm suggesting we move that date back to 100 days prior, and more importantly, this thing says that you didn't balance, which means that in some legislative districts, you're going to take away polling places and add them in other legislative districts to get that all into kilter. So I'm suggesting in an amendment here that you not allow any polling places in voting rights protected communities to be closed, and you make the equity by simply adding polling places in the districts that need more.
Mr.
You
Maxey,
can
if you could
add
please wrap
without
up your
subtracting.
testimony. Thank you very much. Members, any questions?
Yeah.
Representative Busey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Maxey, can you elaborate a little bit more on this bill when it specifically deals with that voting issue that we ran out of time right there, but I'd like to hear a little more about your concerns, because I know we had that Bohack bill and you talked about it, specifically how it could lead to an early snapshot that's not going to be representative of the electorate come election day.
Just to restate,
Yeah.
you're doing the math after voter registration is completed, which is right before the election, which is months after you would find polling places. So we need to move that date. I would suggest 180 days prior, which is sort of in the end of May, which is all the voter registration for the primary will be processed. Then you get a snapshot and use that to set the polling places if you're going to do the mathematic formula. However, I think the mathematic formula is problematic because we've had a lot of testimony here and everybody agreed that we don't want to close a lot of polling places in the first years of these voting centers. I applaud Representative Click of moving up to 80%. Only 20% could be closed. But when you do this mathematics to make sure that in small counties that they're equal to the voter registration in proportion to the voter registration in each of the 4 commissioners' precincts, or in the large counties above 100,000 where you're doing it based on state representative districts. I've not done the math in any counties. I've heard in Harris County that this means that some legislative districts are going to lose 10 polling places and others gain 10 polling places. I am going to assume that when we do this, because there are many more polling places today with smaller numbers of registered voters in minority areas, this is going to have a pattern of closing voting centers in voting rights protected communities, or having fewer there while doing the equity. You can keep equity, in my suggestion, by just adding more voting centers in the areas that need more to get to equity on voter registration percentages without closing historic voting locations.
Well, I appreciate it, and thank you for this handout. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Anchia.
Thank you. And first, I'd like to thank Chairwoman Click and Vice Chair Cortez for allowing me to sit at the dais today. And I want to be respectful of the members of the committee and not take up a lot of time. But Glenn, we've been working on voting issues for a long time now. I've served on this very committee for 6 years during the height of the photo ID legislation. And I see a full room like this, and I'm reminded of those days, of that, ultimately that bill that was struck down by a federal court and that we had to fix just last session. But we were in an environment with strict photo ID for 8 years, I guess, before the court sorted it out. And I'm consuming this in the context of 10 findings of intentional discrimination by the Texas Legislature against Latinos and African Americans. And this is not old-timey newsreel. This is contemporaneous. This is this decade, right, that we found these 10 findings by 3 different federal courts. And I'm also consuming this at the end of a session where at the outset of the session we had the Secretary of State that tried to purge 100,000 U.S. citizen voters from the list, right? Many of them would have been Spanish surname voters, maybe Asian voters, right? Our review of the list has indicated that a high percentage of those would have been new U.S. citizens. And so 10 findings of intentional discrimination against Latinos and African Americans by 3 federal courts, 100,000 people potentially purged from a voter list. And I'm chairman of the Mexican American Legislative Caucus, which is a bipartisan caucus. We're very, very concerned on the heels of all of that in 1 decade alone that now we are following it with this Christmas tree bill, which I think is a good way to describe it, that has some really good things in it, by the way. I think some things that all of us could get behind. But on a net basis, is it your assessment that this bill would make it easier or harder for people of color to vote?
I think this bill does make it harder for people of color, people that have traditionally been protected by the Voting Rights Act, to have their voting rights impeded. The section I just spoke about, while it talks about having equity of voting centers across a county to match voter population, I think its real intent on the ground to get to that place is will be to close voting centers or have fewer voting centers away from the traditional voting patterns of where people have always gone to vote, people of color in our communities will have their voting centers closed, where they will have to find new places to vote, be unfamiliar with those places across our communities. I think that's going to be the effect of it. While on paper it looks like it's just giving equity, and I'm all for adding many more voting centers in Anglo areas if the population and voter registration says that is needed, so there are not lines. But you don't do that with the risk of taking away access of voting in communities of color.
Do you think we have too many people voting right now?
I know we don't have too many people voting.
Isn't Texas still in the lowest quintile? Ever since I've been in the legislature, we have been in the lowest 5 of all states, even when we had a former Texas governor, sort of, last 10, I should say. We had a Texas governor who was running for president, and we came in at 42nd in the nation, right? And in this last election, we were 50th in the nation? And so I'm trying to figure out what we're trying to solve for here.
And I think that we have to put all this in together in what's going to happen in a presidential year coming up. It's going to be a lot of interest in that election. We'll probably have the highest turnout we've ever had in Texas, even though we've been poor. It's going to be a lot higher, and we are not prepared for it. We have now removed straight ticket voting, which has been an assist for people in communities across this state. In Harris County, for instance, where people will be marking a ballot, turning a wheel, unless they get new machines, turning a wheel, where the average voter has taken about 1 minute to go in, put in a code, and hit one straight ticket. They're not going to have to do that 80 times. If you do the math on that, a voter is going to be in a polling place for up to 10 to 15 minutes, where they were in there for one. And if you just do the math, the line, if you had a line of 2 hours on election day in a polling place in a presidential election, that is a 10-hour line. And that is voter suppression. And when you do these kinds of things of taking away the historical voting places, inadvertently perhaps, of people of color, and with those lines, and with the voter ID situation, and with on and on and on, we have a recipe for disaster of suppressing votes to a historic number in the future election.
Thank you. Representative Israel?
Thank you. Mr. Maxey, just to keep on this voting centers thing, it's this language is very frustrating to me, because just as we're finding resources and ways to say, hey, your county elections officials are here to help you, the voter, with long lines and with the fact that you're stuck in South Austin and want to vote and your precinct is in Pflugerville. This language is coming to us at a time when I've never seen this legislature so hell-bent on nudging their nose into the business of county and local government. It used to be a little bit a bill here and a bill there, but it seems like we're doing it every week. And I guess I'm just saying that I'm in your years of experience that doesn't this take away the control of that county official who knows that the Asian market on North Lamar has a high peak and during this time, and this is a way for us to make it easier for people to vote. Doesn't it take those resources away by saying that it requires counties with less than 1 million people who use countywide polling places to divvy them up by registered voter and county commissioner precinct, when in this day and age we're dealing with a super region where people are traveling throughout that region every day and don't even know they cross the county line?
Well, my answer to that is yes, I think that we are being too prescriptive at the state level. We are a huge proponent of voting centers. They are better than sliced bread. They give people access to be able to vote where they are, where they work, where they go to school. It makes it much more convenient. We don't want to impede having voting centers anywhere. But I have said on many bills during this session, we should leave that decision. My position personally is not to close any traditional voting places when you have voting centers, unless they are ADA non-compliant or they are just across the street from another traditional precinct place. Keep them all open, and I think that the bill as it came over from the Senate had that language in it, that we would, in urban areas, getting new voting centers, that we would keep all of the polling places open that have traditionally been there, and then just let voters go where they need to vote. This shouldn't be about closing centers at all. It should be about just allowing people to go what's most convenient to cast a ballot. So I would prefer taking all the language about closing them, other than saying that, raising the number to the 80%, so that they still have some wiggle room to close the inefficient ones, the very small precincts because of redistricting, and those kinds of things could happen. But keep them all open. Keep as many as possible open, and give convenience to voters.
Thank you. Chairwoman Click.
Under existing statute, a county that uses vote centers can reduce the number of polling places by 50%. Is that correct?
That's correct, and that's way too many.
And which is why the language was added that would actually increase the number of potential vote centers in a high turnout election.
I applaud that.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Thank you to our speakers. Our next three speakers to come up are Adrian Shelley, Alan Vera, and Joseph Reynolds. If you could please make your way to the front. Come on down. Once again, please state your name, who you represent, and your position. We'll be timing it at 2 minutes. Chair calls Adrian Shelley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, Adrian Shelley with Public Citizen testifying against the committee substitute to Senate Bill 9. I want to start by quoting from a letter that was sent to this committee yesterday by county judges for Bexar, Dallas, El Paso, Harris, and Travis counties, representing about 40% of the state's population in total. And the letter concludes by saying, quote, SB 9 makes voting harder, scarier, and more confusing for voters. And I understand that there is a lot in this bill, and some of it is probably pretty well intentioned, but I think we need to take a step back and look at the effect that legislation like this has on voters and on voter participation in Texas. We've already heard that we have among the lowest rates of participation in the state, and we simply do not need measures that make voting more difficult, more scary. We have reviewed our election procedures. We have looked for evidence of voter fraud across the state, and there is no widespread voter fraud. It just has not been uncovered here in Texas. What we do have is a couple of prominent examples of people who have been made essentially sacrificial lambs for what are probably innocent mistakes. People like Crystal Mason, African-American woman who is in prison for 5 years, Rosa Ortega, a Latina woman who is in prison now for 8 years. We are sending messages with those actions and with legislation like that, like this. And just want to point to one example that's already been discussed a little bit. That's Section 4.04, countywide polling places mathematically conforming to registration. This will have a discriminatory effect, whether it's intended or not. And so for that reason, we're opposed. Thank you.
Mr. Vera.
Alan Vera, Chairman, Harris County Republican Party Ballot Security Committee, testifying in support of House CSSB 9. For the record, we oppose this bill in the Senate. We're usually very leery of election omnibus bills, and the SB 9 you receive from the Senate is the dumpster fire of all omnibus bills. Let me quickly explain why your version of the bill is better than what you received from the Senate. Section 502 of the Senate bill you received was the product of a chain of logic that would give Mr. Spock of Star Trek a migraine. During the interim, the Senate Select Committee on Election Integrity interviewed many alleged experts on computer security who seemed devoted to the Chicken Little approach to DRE voting security. Instead of following through with a bill laying out specific criteria for continuous improvement of security of DRE systems, similar to what I passed out to you now, the Senate chose instead to try to force all of Texas back to the election medium with the historically worst track record of election fraud, paper ballots. Even worse, the original bill would leave all of Texas dependent on a single vendor for voting equipment. And even worse, the original bill prescribed the same voting system used by Broward County, Florida, the epicenter of election chaos. And as they defended that selection, we've heard, and you'll probably hear today, a plethora of misleading statements. Number one, it's not a paper ballot, it's a verifiable paper trail, it's a paper record. Wrong. When the official record of the cast ballot is saved on paper, It's a paper ballot. 2, Broward County doesn't have unique serial numbers like Texas on their ballots. Wrong. Ms. Pat Nesbitt, Director of Election Day Operations for the Broward County Supervisor of Elections, says, quote, every ballot here has a precinct number, a ballot style number, and a unique serial number. And 3, SB 9 proposes a hybrid, not a paper ballot system. Wrong. A true hybrid system would capture and retain an electronic record of the voters' selections when the voter made those selections and cast the ballot. The proposed SB 9 system, the former one, had a touchscreen printer interface which directly recorded nothing of the voter's selections and simply generated the printout of a paper ballot fed into a typically unreliable scanner. The scanner's memory, it's not a memory, it's simply a counter, falls far short of DRE technology and reliability. Your CSSB9 is a significant improvement to the Senate's version, even though there's still some hair on it. We urge you to stick to your guns. Do not give in to the Chicken Little hysteria. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Members, any questions?
Yes.
Representative Swanson.
Yes. Thank you for coming, Mr. Vera. I had some questions about why have paper ballots been so vulnerable for election fraud?
Historically, the two primary reasons are they are subject to counterfeit. If people can counterfeit our currency, they can counterfeit a paper ballot. Every time you read or hear a story of an election where suddenly at the last minute cartons of paper ballots show up, the chances are very high they've been counterfeited. The second reason is post-election alteration. With a paper ballot, anyone can add an extra tick or a mark on the line of any candidate and change the election result. If a voter's ballot shows 2 votes for the same office, that vote is discounted completely. So counterfeiting in quantity and post-election alteration are the 2 primary vehicles for paper ballot fraud.
Okay, do you have any other examples, specific examples for us that would demonstrate the vulnerability of paper ballots?
Certainly on the counterfeiting side, so I'll tell you how old I am. The 1948 election of Lyndon Johnson in Texas to the U.S. Senate was marked by the last second appearance of 40 cartons of paper ballots in the exact numerical serial number sequence that put him over the top of that election. More recently, 2008 November in Minnesota, on election night, candidate Al Franken was declared the loser. The next morning, 14 cartons of paper ballots showed up mysteriously and changed the election result. So those are clear and frequent examples of the counterfeiting side of it. The post-election alteration are more difficult to catch, but there are some, and I think if Mr. Johnson, who worked for Representative Bohack for years, comes here, he'll be able to give you some exact examples in Texas of the alteration.
Okay, so why did you refer to the ballot scanners as unreliable?
The ballot scanners are unreliable based on experience. In Harris County, I conduct a lot of the recount elections, or I at least provide the staff and supervision. One of my last ones was Representative Kane's recount on his primary. We always start with the mail ballots. The mail ballots are paper ballots, which are counted through scanners. We find in every recount that we change the results on the mail ballots because the scanner doesn't pick it up correctly. If the voter makes an errant mark near the line, it counts it wrong. And so in that particular election, as an example, 42 ballots had their votes changed when the people looked at them because the scanner erred. And that's been true in recount after recount. The scanners just aren't as reliable as the electronic.
So if you said that there's only one company that makes these, they call them hybrid, but I realize that the paper is what, if they disagree, the paper rules, so therefore it is a paper ballot system. But if only one company has certified machines like that, and this committee said it's gotten changed, but if there were a requirement that counties use those machines, would it be safe to call that a vendor bill?
I would call it a vendor bill. In fact, I did in the Senate. I call it a vendor bill, and I also call it an unfunded mandate, because even though there are bills running to try to provide financial help to the counties to buy the equipment, none of that includes the paper. And for that system, the paper has been charged as high as $2 per sheet of paper.
Wow. So you've been coming for years and you've been doing this research. So you've worked on elections across the country. Are you aware of any other serious problems with the voting system described in the original version of SB 9?
Two experiences, one indirect, one direct. In Florida, when I've canvassed the election integrity people there, they report that this particular system is subject to frequent jamming when the ballot is coming out of the touchscreen interface and when the ballot's being fed into the scanner. And the jamming requires the voter to get help from a clerk who then can see the voter's ballot. And that's been a complaint that's been running pretty heavily through Florida. The other example was May of 2018, Harris County. Humble ISD was unable to secure DRE equipment for their bond election on the May uniform election day. They used this DS200 system, borrowed it, rented it, and had two members of my ballot security committee were the election judge and alternate for that election, and they had a disaster with that system. Not only were the jamming problems an issue, but at one point, the memory card, which is a thumb drive like you could buy at a retail store, failed, and they had to take all the ballots out that had already been cast during early voting for the past 5 days, reset the machine to zero, and refeed every paper ballot again to catch up on the count.
Wow. So if so, and I do appreciate you bringing that out. This is the first time I've heard it about the concerns I've heard about people losing their secret ballot because it's printed right there for everyone to see, and if other voters or a clerk are standing there or want to assist them in feeding their ballot in, they get to read how the person voted. And so if some company could produce a true DRE voting machine system, the type that does not use this paper thing, but it also, they could make one that provided a paper record of the ballot, would your ballot security committee still have concerns?
Our concerns would be less, but we still have a serious concern, and that is what happens to that paper record or receipt. In many we heard in this committee last session, story after story, testimony after testimony from South Texas, where voters were intimidated and told that if they didn't vote for a certain commissioner or a certain utility commissioner, that their spouse, father, in-law would lose their job. The concern with any piece of paper with the actual ballot floating around gives the unions and others the opportunity to demand to the voters show them the ballot the way it was cast. That would be a concern. We'd have to figure out some way to make sure the ballot receipt never left the polling place.
That's a huge concern, thank you. And can you explain one more time why the voting system proposed in the original SB 9 would not be a true hybrid system, as people like to call it?
The word hybrid in today's lexicon is most easily understood with automobiles. A hybrid automobile can run on at least two different sources of energy, usually electric and fossil fuels, gasoline. That's a hybrid, and you can switch between the two, and they both work. To be a true hybrid, the voting system would have to capture directly the voter's vote as they entered it and cast the ballot and store that in memory, and then provide a paper ballot. The system proposed by the original SB 9 did not do that. There was no electronic capture of the voter's input, and so it's not truly a hybrid.
Okay, well, thank you so much for this information, because there's been a tremendous amount of misinformation about these machines, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions, members?
Yeah, just one.
Representative Kane.
Mr. Vera, you'd mentioned this machine and the memory card, and you'd made a statement that you can buy one at the store. It's my understanding that you actually cannot do so. That the prongs line up differently, it's shaped differently. You cannot put a regular USB memory card into these machines. Is that correct?
That may be, sir. That may be correct. That it may be different. But when my two committee members reported back to me after that election, they were saying it's just like something you'd buy at Walmart.
I just want for people to know.
Okay.
You cannot. It is custom made. You cannot use a regular USB drive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you. Please state your name, your position on the measure, and who you
Chair and
represent.
committee, I'm Joe Reynolds. I live on 49th Street in Austin. I'm an election judge, and I've worked elections for more than 20 years. I have experience before Bush Gore. I represent myself, and I'm opposed. SB 9 has a number of severe faults, and you were just given a piece of paper that covers some of the most obvious. My first concern is that the bill exposes election workers to severe penalties for conditions beyond their control, things like equipment failure or running out of supplies. My item 1 covers those in detail. I won't do it here. The bill language assumes capabilities for voting equipment that may not be real, and if the equipment fails, then backup procedures for sure would not meet the requirements of the bill. The bill is aggressive in intent for some things and would be unintended consequences. My items 2, 4, and 5 include examples. Item 2 shows that construction crews could violate the laws by blocking sidewalks. Item 4 illustrates improper language could disallow common polling places because customers in grocery stores, which are commonly used, would have to be deprived of their cell phones, and a church required to shut its office. That was my situation back in November. Item 5, I'm wondering why special transit bus drivers or Uber drivers or neighbors can't share rides. We have, in my polling, in my precinct, 5 neighbors that regularly ride together, and this would not, they would violate that. They would have to get a special form. My item 3 deals with election judges correcting voter list problems. At my poll, we have a regular voter, Bobby, who's legally blind. Bobby is well known to me and to all the poll workers. One election, Bobby had her state ID and a brand new voter card from the county. When we checked her status to get her a ballot, she was listed as ineligible to vote, and this seemed wrong. So I called the county elections hotline. No, she can't vote. Why? No, she can't vote. Well, get me your supervisor. No, she can't vote. Get me your supervisor. No, she can't vote. Why? She's been reported dead. Well, we knew Bobby was very much alive, and so I voted her provisionally, and we all sent affidavits that Bobby was very much alive. And next election, she was allowed to vote. And so it seems I got Bobby raised from the dead. Now, my item 6 shows problems with language depriving voters of mail ballots, the notices that are on there. Pregnancy is okay, but having a communicable disease is not a reason for not going to the poll. My item 7 points to an unnecessary process that violates election secrecy. I ask you thoroughly edit this bill as I see it's severely flawed.
Thank you. Representative Israel.
Madam Chair, we didn't ask if we had questions of Mr. Shelley. Can I ask him a question? Mr. Shelley, there was an item in the news. You mentioned her name, and I think her name deserves to be mentioned, and her case deserves to be highlighted at this hearing, because we're dealing with a bill that has a lot of penalties in it and punitive things. But would you elaborate more on the case of Crystal Mason, who is now in jail?
Would you state your name again and position on the issue for the people at home?
Yes, Madam Chair, Representative, thank you. Adrian Shelley, again with Public Citizen, still testifying in opposition to the bill. So you're referring to the case of Crystal Mason. She was imprisoned, I believe, for tax fraud. She served her term. She was out on release. She was not off paper. She was under the mistaken impression that she would be able to vote. She cast a ballot. She ended up being convicted of voter fraud and is serving 5 years. And, I think that case and the case of Rosa Ortega are illustrative of the actual effect that this sort of effort is having in our state. We don't know that we're curtailing widespread voter fraud. We do know that we have over-criminalized in a couple of very unfortunate cases.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other? Chairman Anchia.
Yeah. Thank you. And to the gentleman at the end, I apologize for not remembering your name.
I'm Joe Reynolds.
Mr. Reynolds, thank you for being here and testifying today. I've been doing elected public service for about 20 years, and before that did volunteer on campaigns. So we have a long track record of experience in all things elections. It's my feeling that when the state consistently changes the rules, whether it be for photo ID or widespread changes like this, that it takes, and this is really a meta question, that it takes 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 elections for that to be socialized among election workers across this very, very big state. It takes repeated training. It takes a lot of attention. It takes a pretty in-depth knowledge of the elections code for it to really sink in to the infrastructure that makes our elections go. And I have found, and I want your reaction to this, I've found that more often than not, what people think is fraud is actually human error and mistake. And that is not to say that we shouldn't change the election law, but when we engage in widespread changes, the implementation of that takes a long time. People are still, in the district that I represent, getting it wrong on what is required and not required on photo ID, right? And still sending people away because they believe they are ineligible to vote because they don't have the right kind of ID, despite court cases to the contrary. What are your views on this generally? And again, real top level, if you don't mind.
Okay, let's think this. I've seen some material from California, and I've got, of course, the 20 years experience here in Texas. In some cases, the training that we get is very trivial, how to set up the booths. But in other cases, you're dealing with a trainer when you're doing that. You're not dealing with the voter, and that makes a whole difference when you're trying to get things across. And voters are precious. They need to be protected. So you have to work through that stuff. But yeah, it does take a long time. And sometimes mistakes get made anyway. Here in Travis County, the machines that we have, every voter goes and gets a random code that they can then go to a booth and vote. But that has to have the right code on it or they don't get the right ballot. Okay? And even though we're all trained and we all work on that stuff, I put a monitor there to make sure that whoever's passing that out, and the voter's going to sign that says this is the right ballot type. But we still find when my guys are helping, oversee that, 2 to 3% mistakes, and it's just because people are people. Yeah. And no, that guy's whoever's running that booth may not know who's there at all. It's not like they're trying to get at somebody. They just they screwed up.
Yeah, yeah. And this question is for Mr. Vera. I really liked your testimony, Mr. Vera. I had a similar experience as you in my first election where we had optical scanner, but the printing on the scanning did not line up with the optical reader, and we had a couple hundred votes that were not tallied until there was and only because there was a recount trigger did we discover that the printing on the ballot was not lining up with the scanning, and that allowed, I don't know, a couple hundred votes to count that would not otherwise have counted. So I share your concerns about optical scanners at times, and the error rate is not insignificant. Yeah,
we would agree, and we have yet to do a recount for the mail ballots where there weren't that level of changes in votes because the scanner could not decipher what the voter wanted. So we had to go into human interpretation of what was the voter's intent.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any other questions?
That's exactly right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for all your service on elections.
Our next 3 witnesses are Alex Burnell, Hannah Hughes, and Mark Kundle. Alex Burnell, Mark Kundle, and Hannah Hughes. Please come up. Please state your name, who you represent, and your position on the record. Okay, Chair calls Alex Burnell.
My name is Alex Burnell, and I'm against the bill. Hello, Chair Click and Vice Chair.
Are you representing yourself, sir?
I'm with Move Texas. My name is Alex Burnell. I'm the advocacy manager at Move Texas. Move Texas is a grassroots, nonpartisan nonprofit that empowers young people across the state of Texas through voter registration and issue advocacy in 6 cities: San Antonio, Austin, Laredo, Dallas, San Marcos, and Seguin. We work with young people, often first-time voters, and help them develop a sense of their own power. Every day through Move's work, our team of fellows, interns, volunteers, propose ideas that I think warrant a mic and a seat at the table for young people. Online voter registration, same-day voter registration, automatic voter registration, reforms that would modernize the infrastructure of our system that, if pursued, would in all likelihood grow the electorate and dramatically increase turnout. As an organization, that's our spirit: get marginalized people participating, coming up with new, modern ideas that decrease barriers for the most marginalized. In other words, do it by us and for us. Peer-to-peer, as we like to say. The spirit of SB 9 is diametrically the opposite. In SB 9, harsher penalties are supposed to create accountability, as if deterrence is not a thoroughly rebuked and is not a piece of thoroughly rebuked and outdated sociology through negative punishment. New assistance paperwork is supposed to prevent vote buying and other forms of corruption that Senator Hughes can only anecdotally confirm. In other words, in his world, rather than peer-to-peer, people helping people, organizations helping the elderly and the disabled, the increased burden of proof and required paperwork in the bill suggest a belief that your peers, your helpers, your community are actually out to exploit you. That's not only a deeply misanthropic point of view, it's also, practically speaking, creating another step in the process to cast a ballot that tired and busy people may not take. As a disabled voter, I know what it means to be tired. And as an advocate for voting rights, I know what it means to be busy. We need to make it easier, not harder. Making it easier for everyone is Move's goal. Making it harder for everyone seems to be SB 9's goal. And I propose that's really it. As someone who uses crutches, I think I know a crutch when I see one. SB 9 is an omnibus bill of outdated crime and punishment prescriptions, suspicion and surveillance, framed as election integrity as our state gets browner and younger. And as turnout reflects the same trends, I think SB 9 is a crutch against those changes. Please vote against this bill.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Members, any questions? Seeing no questions, Chair calls Mark Kundle.
Hello, I'm Mark Kundle. I'm with Rev Up Texas, and I'm testifying on the bill and against the bill on my own and on behalf of Rev Up Texas. I want to acknowledge that Representative Click, Chairman Click, has worked with us in attempting to make this bill better, and there have been some improvements made to the bill, but we still feel like that there's too many things wrong with the bill to lend our support to it. There's at a minimum about 1.6 million Texans with disabilities. And we're trying to engage and involve more people with disabilities in the electoral process. As one woman told me who had a disability, you ain't helping if you ain't helping. And the thing I used to illustrate for well-intentioned people is if there's, for example, an elderly woman standing on the corner at an intersection, the light turns green and out of nowhere comes a Boy Scout, grabs her by the arm and helps her cross the street. Well, she didn't want to go across the street. She didn't ask for help. I think that Chair Click has done a good job in trying to make this a better bill, and we acknowledge that. But I'm reminded of Ronald Reagan at this point in time. And I think at the heart of this bill is the government, state of Texas, trying to impose too much power in the electoral process. And I'm paraphrasing Ronald Reagan when he says, "We're here from the government and we're here to help you."
Okay. Thank you very much. Members, any questions? Thank you. Chair calls Hannah Hughes.
Hello, I'm Hannah Hughes. I'm testifying in opposition to Senate Bill 9, and I'm representing Move Texas. So I'm currently a student at the University of Texas at Austin, right down the street, and an issue advocacy fellow for Move. I'm here today to implore you to reiterate, please oppose Senate Bill 9 because of the heavy fines and the threat of jail time it could impose to our voters. From the bill, if a voter were to make an honest mistake, they could incur a $1,000 fine or even jail time, which is very scary. Implementing such harsh regulations will only deter voters from engaging in our democracy, especially for younger voters such as myself, where we are new to participating in the ritual that is voting. I'm currently 19, so I've been able to vote twice. I'm very proud of that. But those 2 times were incredibly stressful, thinking, am I registered to vote? Where and when do I vote? What do I bring with me? Who do I even vote for? These variables can collide and make making my voice heard in our democracy more difficult. And with such pieces of legislation as Senate Bill 9, it sends a message that the current Texas legislature wants to make that process even more difficult for the voters of Texas. I hope that you oppose this bill and in future support bills that will make voting easier, not bills that will make voting punishable. I want everyone to be able to vote in our great state, and I hope that you'd want to make that process easier. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Representative Fiora.
Ms. Hughes, what do you think would make young people vote more and vote more often? And what would encourage young people like yourself to go back to the 3rd time, the 4th time, and continue this as a habit?
I think definitely starting early with civic engagement programs in our high schools and middle schools will show that voting is incredibly important, but also just sitting out. I mean, I saw Senator Hughes testify on the floor, and seeing that he disregarded Senator Menendez's amendment to have mandatory voting locations on campus or college campuses was a clear message to me that young people may not be taken as seriously. So definitely having like easier registration for voting, mandatory college campus polling locations, I think is a great message from the Texas Ledge. And if these all became bills throughout like the state, or not the state, all states in America, would be a great sign that you do care about my voice, even though I'm only 19 and I just got into this whole voting routine. So.
Well, thank you for your passion and for everything you're doing for the young people around you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Thank you very much to the 3 of you. Our next 3 witnesses are Alice Yee, Christian Bickham, and Sharon Jones. If you, the 3 of you would please come forward. I'm going to repeat it. I don't know if I didn't say it correct. My apologies if I mispronounced your last name, but I have Alice, is that Yee?
My name is Alice Yee. I'm president of Asian Pacific Islander American Public Affairs Association Austin chapter and Texas chair, which include the Houston, Dallas chapter. I'm here representing our API community against the SB 9. The reason...
And yourself too?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
The reason there's on first generation of Asian American, a lot of seniors, and they are not speaking perfectly English, and they living in the assisted livings. They need transportation. That's why our agency, our organization, to encourage Asian American to vote, we always to help them to have a language assistance to the poll and driving them to the poll. But this bill make it harder for this help, for making it harder for our volunteers, for Asian seniors to vote. So for 21st century, I feel like our lawmaker need to think about how to make voting easier, how to make all American voice to be heard, not to suppress our Asian Americans' voice. We've been discriminated for over 150 years in the United States. I don't want to see another Chinese Exclusion Act again. Are we not ashamed our Texas voting rate is so low in the nation? This is why I'm here to represent our API community to against it.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions? Representative Israel?
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Yee, for being here. I want to recognize you as a leading voice in our Central Texas community, especially as well as the state, for reminding us of the growing demographic trend that is the growth in the Asian American community. And we've seen that in not just in Travis County, but in Central Texas. And there's a portion of this bill that we were speaking to, and when it comes to voting locations, whether that be mobile voting or early voting or voting centers on election day, do you feel like you can pick up the phone and contact your county officials and give feedback as they are planning whether and how they're going to have voting locations?
Our Travis County, yes, but not in Hays County and other Dallas County, because Hays County last year we have a lot of Asian Americans. We even have a group people outside the poll was rejected because the language assistant. Mm-hmm. They are not allowed language assistant to the poll, and this is not acceptable. Our APAPA, Asian Pacific Islander, is a non-profit and non-partisan. We do the voter education and voter participation. That's our mission, and so we're really worried about this bill now.
All right. Well, thank you for being here. I appreciate your voice.
Thank you, Representative. Any other questions, members? Thank you very much. Chair calls Kristen Bickham.
Thank you. My name is Kristen Bickham, and I live in Dallas County. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm here to testify in favor of SB 9 and register opposition to the committee's substitute bill.
Ma'am, are you speaking on behalf of?
Oh, myself. Myself.
Okay, can you repeat your position on the bill, please?
I'm in favor of SB 9.
You're in favor of SB 9?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Central Count poll watchers should be able to electronically record ballot counting. And additionally, I support the bill because Texans need a mandated paper audit trail for Texas elections, including zero tapes and results tapes. I've been a poll watcher at Central County and Dallas County for 4 election cycles: November 2016, March and November 2018, and May 2019. In three of 4 of these elections, sheriff's deputies were brought in to intimidate and obstruct we watchers at Central County. Additionally, I and other watchers have observed election workers tabulating, replacing, and removing certain voting electronic results without being under oath and without being supervised by either a presiding judge or an alternate judge per the election code. Early voting results were observed to be input into a private laptop with wireless connectivity that was seen entering and leaving the building during 4 days of tabulations. Multiple Wi-Fi and Bluetooth networks were observed from the hallway operating for days at Central County while tabulations were occurring. Based on my observations, I have no confidence in Dallas County's election results because of the lack of respect for rule of law in the Texas Election Code, as well as lack of transparency that prevails at Dallas County Central Counting. I do not believe the tabulations are legitimate or correct, and the behavior of election officers toward watchers is unconscionable and not what you as legislators intend. Therefore, we watchers need SB 9 as originally drafted so that we can electronically record our observations to improve the behavior of the bad actors. Additionally, we need SB 9 to provide a paper audit trail to protect the integrity of Texas elections.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your
Thank you.
testimony. Members, any questions? Thank you. Chair calls Betsy Singleton. I'm sorry. Chair calls Sharon Jones.
Thank you, members, for this opportunity. I'm Sharon Watkins Jones of Houston, Texas. I am speaking in opposition of Senate Bill 9 on behalf of the members of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. It's very important for us to know, for you to know who we are and why we're here. Delta Sigma Theta's first social action was to carry a banner in the Women's Suffragette March in 1913, even though the vote was not necessarily intended for black women and we were not necessarily invited to march. Our 22 founders did it anyway. In 1976, the Honorable Barbara Jordan, a member of Delta Sigma Theta and the first black woman elected to the Texas Senate, addressed the National Democratic Convention and spoke of the unalienable rights of we the people, even though black people were not originally thought to be included in that we. And in the 60s and 70s, we fought hard for basic dignities guaranteed in that we the people. Barbara Jordan eloquently spoke of the constitutional rights anyway. Fast forward to 2019, and we, the members of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, stand before this committee to address Senate Bill 9, a bill that to us feels like a bold-faced intent to disenfranchise Texas voters with restrictive rules and paperwork that hinder elderly and disabled voters from getting to the polls, and closes polling locations in communities of color, and harshly penalizes voters who make mistakes on their voter registration applications. We believe that this bill is designed to keep us away from the polls by virtue of the fact that it also provides immunity to law enforcement to prey upon voters and make unnecessary arrests. And we know that in this legislative environment, the odds may be stacked against us, but as Deltas, we are here to oppose it anyway. You might ask us why we do this and why we have driven, ridden, and flown from all over the great state to make this stand. And if you don't know, the ladies with me in red will tell you that this is who we are, what we do, and we are not going anywhere until our right to vote and to help each other exercise this right is preserved. So you may ignore us today, but trust that you will not be ignored by us at the ballot box. We ask that Senate Bill 9 not be voted out of this committee for consideration by your colleagues. We ask that you carefully preserve the right of all citizens to take part in this process guaranteed to us by the United States Constitution. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. And you are also representing, ma'am, you're also representing yourself. Okay, I think we do have some questions for you, if you can please hang tight. No?
I do.
Oh, Representative Israel?
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. It means a lot to me that you're telling your story. It gave me chills when you told me about your history.
Is your mic
Oh,
on?
I'm sorry. I just turned it off. The story that you told was a beautiful one and an American one. But I don't know the answer to this question, but I would surmise that you guys, as a service organization, do things in your respective communities to help people be aware that there's an election coming up, and we'll do things like
we register voters.
Does Grandma need a ride to the poll? Would you elaborate a little bit more on what you do?
Yes, so we have chapters in every area of Texas. We register voters. We help people to the polls. We do voter education. We are nonpartisan, but we do our best to help people exercise their right to vote.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Thank you so much for your testimony to the three of you. Our next three speakers.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to be recognized for a moment, please.
Oh, sure. Representative Fiala.
I would like to make a motion that we reopen registration. Apparently, there's a whole lot of people that drove all the way out here, spent money, time to register, and we're going to break in half an hour, and I'd like for that to be considered, please.
Members, is there any discussion on this request?
I'm unclear on the procedures, but I know that there's folks who have been traveling from out of town to get here, and I would like to hear the chair's thoughts on that. I mean, I want to be respectful of the process and respectful of people who maybe anticipated an afternoon testimony and didn't arrive in time to register.
And if I can clarify, Mr. Chair, just out of respect to the committee, of course, but I think that if we opened it up for another half hour, 45 minutes, I think it'd give everybody that drove all the way out here, spent their time and money, an adequate opportunity to register.
And we appreciate the motion you've made. We're going to be recessing here in about 10 minutes, and we will discuss this, myself and the chair with you, your motion, during our recess.
Thank you for your
get further
consideration.
clarification on what you're asking.
Vice Chair Cortez, I
Yes.
have another question. In terms of substantial testimony, well, I have a number of questions, of course, for OAG and the Secretary of State.
Yes.
Is it possible, I don't know if it is possible, we're running out of time, to get perhaps the Secretary of State's office up here before we recess and perhaps bring them back afterwards to get their answers on some of our questions?
Who do we have here from the Secretary of State's office? We do have two witnesses from the Secretary of State's office. If you could please come forward.
I don't mean
These
to
will
be
be
out
our
of order
last
either.
speakers before we head to the floor. We do gavel in at 10 a.m. We will return back to this committee room upon adjournment on the House floor. If you would please state your name, who you represent, position on the bill, and then Representative Israel, you have the floor.
Keith Ingram here from the Texas Secretary of State's Office Elections Division on SB 9.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Ingram. I had a lot of questions. If you'll give me just a second, I'm looking through my notes. My first question was, what is the code now regarding penalizing? Are there criminal penalties in place now for poll workers who might not follow proper procedures?
65014 provides for a Class B misdemeanor
Of the election code?
of the election code. If the poll workers don't do a precinct return, if it's a precinct county, we've got about 20 to 30 of those depending on the election.
Say that again. What's the penalty?
Class B.
Class
misdemeanor.
B misdemeanor.
Yes.
And what does that mean in terms of punishment?
I'm not sure. I think.
Do you know
Class
what the range
Bs,
of? So that means they could.
I think they're up to 6 months.
Is
in
that
jail.
a fine or is that prison? I don't know.
It can be both. A Class B misdemeanor can be up to 6 months in prison, I believe, but I would defer to criminal law experts on that.
Okay. So, and restate again, what would be the infraction?
65014 provides for counties that don't have a central count have to do the precinct return that night in the polling place, and if they don't, it's a Class B misdemeanor.
And meaning don't have a central count, meaning they don't have procedures in place to say we're going to gather at the courthouse, for example.
Right. You know, the traditional way of counting ballots is hand counted in the precinct on election night, and we have anywhere from 20 to 30 counties who follow that model depending on the election. If it's a lower turnout election, we'll have more counties hand counting in the polling place. If it's a higher turnout, then there'll be more counties doing central count.
So I'm guessing that's old language?
I'm not sure how long. I mean, 65014 has been on the books since codification, but I'm not sure if the penalty was there that whole time.
As I read the bill, it also is saying you can't count your votes unless you're in a central location. And you can't use electronic devices, no connection there. So how do you fulfill both of those requirements?
Well, in a county that's got a central count station, then obviously they do count their ballots at central count. I'm not sure what you're getting at with your question, though, because counties aren't required to have a central count, and I don't think anything in this bill would require a county to use a central count.
Well, we don't do old-fashioned paper counting anymore.
That's true.
Much to the dismay of some people. But if we are if you're at various points of a county that doesn't do central counting, it seems to me with the machinery that we have now that's electronic, it means you're counting your votes at your precinct.
That's right.
And I may be remembering something from the bill but the bill says you can't do it at your precinct. You got to come together and do one grand count.
I don't remember that in the bill. I saw that they do allow cameras from poll watchers to record counting of the ballots, and that modification is in 61.014 of the election code. So 61.014 says that you can't carry a device capable of making images into the polling place, but they say except for counting ballots. And so it would allow, the 61014 prohibition is also at central count, and so this change would allow the poll watchers to record the counting of ballots, whether it's at the precinct or at central count.
All right. Thank you.
Representative Anchia.
Thank you, Mr. Ingram. Really quickly, I wanted to ask you about HAVA funds, Help America Vote Act funds.
Sure.
How much does the agency still have left?
We've got, there's two different HAVA funds.
Buckets.
We've got the old HAVA funds that were given to us back in the mid-2000s. We have about 1.1 million left of that. That's going to get us into the next biennium for team maintenance, the voter registration database. We just last year received a new appropriation of $23.3 million from the federal government, 1.1 million matched by the state, and out of that money we've spent about $950,000. We've obligated $9 million more for election security assessments, and we have about 13 or 14 million left on top of that we were planning to use to assist counties with remediation efforts after they get assessed.
So the bill calls for additional technological security measures on DREs. What would you project to be the HAVA fund allocation should this bill
Chairman Anchia,
be?
there was some concern about the fact that this is not on the bill in terms of HAVA funds.
So there are technological security measures that are called for. That would be absolutely paid by HAVA, and I'm trying to understand how much it would, how many HAVA funds would go to the technological security measures. It's completely appropriate.
Do you remember what section of the bill that was? I saw it as well.
So originally it's section 4, page 19.
Because the way that we read that, yeah, there we go. It's 4.01. The way that we read that, it's not going to require any expenditure of funds. This is something that our office is tasked with communicating to the counties best practices for technological security, and that's part of what we're already doing with our election security assessments. And as that, those are paid for by HAVA, but this we don't think adds any responsibility to that.
So for the existing tasks that you have, that is, you do use HAVA funds. You do not read this as triggering the need for expenditure of any funds, including HAVA funds.
That's right.
Okay.
This
thank
just,
you.
I think, requires more clear procedures on our part.
Okay, that's all I was asking.
Okay, thank you, Representative. Any other, Representative Israel?
Yeah, found some more notes. Mr. Ingram, this may be a question for the OAG, but I wanted to give you, get your take on this as well. Given the controversy that we had earlier this year about the mandate that went out around the state about the voter database, this language in 4.01 gives direct access to the electronic voter database to the Attorney General.
Right.
Why would we do that?
Currently, the Attorney General has the same public access that anybody could have, and they want to have access.
This says immediate, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, and they want to have a login to the full database of team so that they can do criminal investigations without having to.
You may not appreciate that, but that makes me really nervous, given what happened earlier this year. I'm very concerned. Do you know who requested this? Was this the OAG request? Were you consulted as this was put into the bill?
I have no idea who requested the language. The language in the original bill was more broad. It said that any appropriate law enforcement official, and we did ask if they meant Attorney General, just say Attorney General. Don't leave it broad. That was our request on the language.
And did you talk to At what point did you talk to the OAG about this language? Was it as it was being drafted in the Senate, or?
I have
And I'm not
never
sure if
talked
this
to the OAG about this language.
You have not talked to
I
the
have
OAG
not.
about this language. So they already have access to Teams. It's just not an immediate, let me log in and see what's happening.
No, they can log in as a public user, same as you can. What the difference is that they would be able to get the driver's license and social security number.
More detailed information.
More detailed information.
Do you know, well, I suppose I should save that question for the Office of the Attorney General. I think I'll leave that there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Kane.
Yes. I'm just curious with your office on some of the interpretation of some of the things in this bill. There's some sections about kind of internet connectivity. There's one that's discussing cellular devices being in the counting, central
Right.
counting, and I'm concerned maybe some of the wording could be a little better. That what's y'all's interpretation? What does that mean if it can't be connected to the internet? Would that mean the device needs to be powered off or in airplane mode? Because in my opinion, a cell phone is connected to the internet.
So there is a function, at least on the iPhones that I have, where you can turn off the data connection, and that's what we would advise central account workers to do, is to turn off the data, and that just leaves the wireless phone capability. And technical ramifications of that, I don't know if it's still connected to the internet or not, but I think if to turn the data off, you can still make phone calls, but you can't look anything up on the internet or send anything over the internet.
Okay. Yeah, I was concerned about that when I was reading the language.
It's important for us to have the ability to communicate with the elections administrators on election night in case there's any questions from the press about their numbers. Oftentimes there are digits transposed, or people put the wrong vote totals in they flip the candidates' vote totals, and so the Associated Press will call us and say, it looks like Culberson County's made a mistake. Can you check with them? And so we'll call Culberson County and find out what the problem is.
Okay. And what about some of these busing concerns people have raised? Are you familiar with that language in the bill? And
I am.
And does your office see that as meaning that a bus driver or somebody of general transportation can't bring more than 3 people?
The way that we read that section is anybody that drives 3 or more voters to the polls, and those 3 or at the same time, and those 3 or more voters all vote curbside, then it would apply to that driver. And there's not a limitation on who that driver can be. It can be an Uber driver or it could be a bus driver, but it only applies if they bring 3 or more voters who all vote curbside at the same time. So it's pretty limited application, I would think.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Busey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On what we were just talking about, what you were just talking about with Briscoe and the driver, can you explain why that is necessary? Why do we need to document who the Uber driver is that are bringing people to vote? I mean, what's the intent there? And why do we feel that to be important? Do you know, or
I do
you work
not.
with the author on that?
We'd have to talk to the author on that.
Okay, that's not something your office wanted or requested or worked with them to put into this bill.
No.
Let me ask you another one. Section 107 of this bill, it takes what are Class A misdemeanors right now, makes them state jail felonies. I'd love to get some elaboration on what that means here. Is this talking about people like if my friend and I go vote together and I ask them a question and I'm not eligible for assistance, then we just committed a state felony? Is that what Bill would be saying? Like in the ballot box, hey, how do I do this? Or, oh man, I forgot, we were just talking in the car. A simple, friendly question. Are we making those simple, friendly interactions that we might have with our spouse or with our 18-year-old child who's voting for the first time
So
a felony?
the unlawful assistance that's being discussed is in 64.036, and it's got a list here of specific actions that would constitute unlawful assistance, and none of the things that you described would be that. This is if you assist a voter in preparing their ballot and you prepare it a way different than the voter wanted, if you tell the voter how they should vote, if you indicate what they should vote, or if you provide assistance to somebody that is not qualified for assistance or didn't request assistance. So that's the limitation on what will be criminalized.
So that last section, qualified for assistance, not qualified for assistance, or didn't request assistance, Can you elaborate on who's not qualified? Again, with the scenario of maybe a parent and their first-time 18-year-old voter?
I'm sorry, I misspoke. The fourth one is provides assistance to a voter who has not requested assistance or didn't select that person to assist them. So it doesn't have anything to do with the voter's qualifications.
So your understanding is, what if you are a first-time voter with your parent? You're able to ask your parent for assistance?
No.
Okay.
No, to be eligible for assistance, you have to have a physical disability that renders the voter unable to write or see, or an inability to read the language in which the ballot is written.
So that's what I'm getting at. If I'm with a first-time voter, an 18-year-old family member, they ask me a honest question in the ballot box. Did a felony just get committed under this law? Is that your understanding? If this was to become law?
Well, I don't know. It would depend on the question, but I mean, you know what I mean? You're not supposed to be talking at the ballot booth, but I mean, people do, but doesn't mean that they're providing assistance.
No, I fully agree. I know you're not supposed to be talking. Right now it's a misdemeanor. I just feel like a lot of times if people are taking their kid for the first time, these are going to be honest mistakes that happen. The kids, it's their first time to vote. I mean, I'm calling them kids. They are adults. We're talking about 18-year-olds. We're talking about people that are nervous, haven't done this before. They're going into the ballot box, and I'm just wondering if it's y'all's interpretation that if this becomes law and they ask a question like that and somebody witnesses it and turns them in, did that 18-year-old just commit a felony under this law?
I don't think so. And again, it would depend on what the question was. Generally, whenever I was telling my kids about how to vote, I told them if you have a question or the machine, you don't understand how to operate it, ask the poll worker. And so that's the poll worker's province. But even that's not assistance. Assistance is helping a voter do the act of voting.
What about like content of voting? The mother and the child, they spend time going over some propositions that are going to be on the ballot. Child doesn't remember. They just ask, how are we voting on Proposition 14? Is that a felony under this law?
That's a crime already. That's 61008.
Okay. So right now.
And 61008, I believe, is a felony, but it could be a Class A.
So you don't see this impacting an 18-year-old first-time voter asking their parent inadvertently because they didn't think about the law because they didn't study the election code as an 18-year-old going and vote. You don't think this impacts them innocently asking a parent or friend who's with them?
I do not. And if it is a crime, it would be a 61008 crime for the parent to tell the child how to vote.
Okay. Well,
and that's a Class B misdemeanor.
Well, I don't think our intent here should be putting children that are first-time voters in jail because of an honest mistake. I think we need to think about the severity of these punishments. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Representative Anchia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Keith, Mr. Ingram, sorry.
Yeah. We have about 2 minutes, Representative.
All right. Well, I can just wait until after the floor.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to go ahead. Members, we are convening today on the House floor at 10 a.m., so it's in the intent of the chair to recess. If there is no objection, the committee will stand recessed.
Mr. Chair, I have a question, please.
Yes, sir.
To be recognized. I would like us to come to a vote or decision on whether we're going to allow more registering prior to gaveling out so people can have time to schedule appropriately.
Well, you're not recognized for that motion at this time, sir.
Thank you.
If there's no objection, the committee will stand recessed until final adjournment recess of the House or during the reading and referral of bills if permission is granted. The chair hears no objection and the committee is recessed until final adjournment. Will be withdrawn. The chair hears no objection. The substitute is withdrawn. The chair hears no objection. The committee is recessed. If there is no objection, Senate Bill 9 will be left pending. The chair hears no objection. Senate Bill 9 is left pending without objection. The chair hears no objection. The committee is recessed until final adjournment recess of the House or during the reading or referral of bills if permission is granted.